Hello my friends, welcome to part 2 of the Mega Mittens tutorial. If you haven't seen part 1, go back and watch that first and come back later. If you have and are all set, let's go. To recap, we have finished making the accent rows for the thumb and will now start picking up the other side of the thumb. On the side of the thumb that is closest to the front, count 12 stitches from the base. You might need to flip your work a little bit to make sure that you're working in the actual back loop, but insert your hook into the back loop of this 12th stitch and pick up color B. Make 2 chains that will count as the first stitch of the row and continue to work into the back loop only, the same checkerboard pattern you have been working for this entire project. When you reach the base of the thumb, simply continue working up the back loop of the accent row to start working the back side or the palm side of your mitten. A pro tip when you reach that base of the thumb is to yarn over slip stitch 2 together over the turning slip stitch you made on the accent row of the thumb and the first stitch of the palm side of your mitten. While this is done to prevent a hole or a gap in the join, it's not crucial that you do this at all. On this palm side of your mitten, you are now going to work increases, a flat part, and decreases to match the front of your mitten. To do this, start by making 16 stitches or 4 repeats of the checkerboard pattern up the palm side of your mitten. Make sure that the final stitch is a color changing yarn over slip stitch and join in color A. For this side of the mitten, you will work the increased stitches up the accent row. So you won't be making stitches in the same space or chaining. Instead, you will just make the additional stitches up the accent row. When you have made your 2 increased stitches, simply make a turning chain and work your way back up to the top of the thumb. You will make increases in the same way on this side, so make sure that the final stitch is a color changing yarn over slip stitch and work 2 additional stitches up the accent row of the thumb. We're working on the other side of the accent row, so this time you are going to work in the 3rd loop, which I'm trying my best to show where you can find in the video. Instead of making a turning chain, slip stitch 1 in the next stitch of the accent row and continue to work your way back to the palm increase. You are going to repeat these 2 rows, keeping in the checkerboard pattern until you have increased by a total of 4 stitches on each side. So 4 stitches up to the palm and 4 stitches up to the thumb. So on the palm part, work the 2 extra stitches up the accent row of the front part of the mitten. On the thumb part, work the 2 extra stitches in the 3rd loop of the accent row of the thumb part, then make a slip stitch to turn. With the risk of sounding like a broken record, I also want to remind you to keep working in the checkerboard pattern and alternating colors until you have increased by 4 stitches on the palm part and 4 stitches on the thumb part. When you have done so, you will continue working the increases on the palm part, but instead you are now going to decrease on the thumb part. The decreases on the thumb are worked exactly like the decreases on the front part of the mitten, so you work in the checkerboard pattern until you have 3 stitches left on row. Then you decrease by yarn over slip stitching 2 together. In case you need a reminder, yarn over, insert hook in the back loop of the first stitch and pick up yarn and pull through the back loop only. Then insert hook in the back loop of the 2nd stitch and pull yarn through all loops on hook. Then you will have 1 stitch left on row, which you will simply skip to effectively decrease by 2 stitches. Then simply turn and work your way back up to the palm part, where you will continue increasing by 2, and these increases are made by working the 2 extra stitches in the accent rows. Continue working in this way until you have decreased by a total of 4 stitches on the thumb part. When you have made the final decrease on the thumb part, you will fasten off and we are going to start working from the wrist cuff again. When you have fastened off at the thumb part, you should have 4 increases and 4 decreases on the thumb part and then 8 increases on the palm part. Now we're going to connect the top and the bottom of the palm parts, and you do this in the following way. Where you fastened off when you started shaping the thumb, pick up the yarn and just like you've done for every other even row in this pattern, work 10 slip stitches in the back loop only in color A, then continue working in the checkerboard pattern until you reach the base of the thumb. Make sure that your final yarn over slip stitch is a color changing yarn over slip stitch, and you are now simply gonna continue working on the other side. So just locate the final stitch before the base of the thumb on the opposite side of the palm part part and yarn over slip stitch in this. Now this joining stitch can be a little tricky, but once you've done it, continue working all the way to the top. Now you are simply going to repeat the flat top and the decrease section from the front. So the flat top and the decrease section for the palm part of this mitten is worked exactly like you did it in the front. If you need a reminder, you are going to work 4 flat rows where you don't increase or decrease, then you are going to decrease by 2 stitches on every other row for 8 rows. If you're feeling a little insecure about how to do this, I have linked to part 1 and the timestamp for the flat part and the decreases in the description of this video. I feel like my instructions are getting less and less detailed over the course of this project, and that is not because I don't want to be thorough, because I really want to be thorough and I want you to end up with the best possible mitten. It's more because I trust that you will pause and go back to the sections where you feel you need a little extra help. When you have worked the flat part and all of the decreases, you are going to make 2 additional accent rows. These are worked in the exact same way as the accent rows for the front part of the mitten, but just in case you need a reminder, the accent rows are worked completely in color A, and you're going to start off on an even row starting with 10 slip stitches in the back loop only. Then you are going to work yarn over slip stitches in the back loop only until you reach the decrease section. In this decrease section and up until the middle of the flat part, you are going to work 9 yarn over slip stitches evenly. When you have done so, you're going to chain 1, you're going to yarn over slip stitch all the way to your starting point. When you have done these 2 accent rows, you are going to fasten off, but leave a long enough tail so that you can use it to sew up your mitten. I chose to weave in my ends before I sew the mitten up, but it's completely up to you when you decide to do it. Just know that you don't need to be super diligent about weaving your ends in. Just like the floats, these are going to sort of fuse to your mitten when you felt it. So for the ends that I could tie up with a double knot and then just snip, I did. And for the ends that were lonely, I just weaved them in over a couple of stitches. It's all going to be fine. Felting is amazing. When it comes to sewing, simply use a tapestry needle and the tail that you left when fastening off. And since you fastened off at the wrist part of the mitten, you are naturally going to start there. And you are going to sew using a mattress stitch from the right side of the mitten, where you alternate picking up a stitch from the foundation chain and then 1 stitch from the final accent row. I'm trying my best to show you what stitch to work in here. But again, felting is going to cover up if you make any mistakes on the sewing part, so simply work in a way that feels natural to you. No matter how you decide to sew it up, keep it going until you reach the first increase section of the front. Here you'll continue the mattress stitch by picking up 1 stitch from the final accent row, but instead of working in the foundation chain, you will pick up 1 stitch per row of the increase. Try to keep it even and neat, but if you can't, again, we're gonna felt this. It's gonna work out in the end. I am truly striving to become the Bob Ross of crochet and just embracing all of our mistakes. Continue working in this way until you reach the top part of your mitten. Here you will have a hole that separates the front and the back and the first and last accent rows. Your goal here is to close this hole up, and you will do it in the following way. Make 1 stitch in the flat part of the mitten, pick up the final stitch of the accent row, make a stitch in the other flat part of the mitten, go back to the final stitch of the accent row, and then pick up the final stitch of the other accent row, and just pull to close. Pick up an additional stitch and close it with the other side once more, and then simply pull your needle and your yarn to the inside of the mitten and fasten off. Just like you did with the other ends, just weave it in over a couple of stitches and it's going to fuse nicely when you felt it. The sewing of the thumb works in the exact same way, where you simply work from the right side using a mattress stitch to connect the final accent row to the final row of your thumb. Work your way up to the decrease section of the thumb and use the same method you did when working over the increase section of the finger part. When you get to the final stitch, just make an extra one to make sure that it's secure. Pull your needle and your yarn to the inside of the mitten and simply weave it in. If you have any other ends left to weave in, do it now, and then you have finished making your first mitten. Well, you still have the felting to do, but this is what it's going to look like before you felt it. It's going to be huge, and that's fine. Moving on to the right mitten, I have already started working on my second pair, so we're gonna do it in the new color. You work the front completely the same way you did for the left mitten. So work the front in the same way you did for the left mitten. If you're unsure on how to do this, go back to part 1. The only difference between the left and right mitten is the placement of the thumb. So for the right mitten, you are going to work the increase section and the flat top of the palm part without shaping the thumb. The thumb of the right mitten will instead be placed on the decrease section. In case this is unclear, you are going to work the increase sections in the following way. On the even rows, start off with 10 slip stitches in color A, then work in the checkerboard pattern until you have a total of 28 stitches or 7 checkerboard repeats. Make a color change and work an additional 2 stitches in the new color into the accent row. Then you are simply going to turn, chain 1 and work your way back. You are going to do this until you have increased by a total of 8 stitches. So increase over 8 rows until you have increased by a total of 8 stitches. Then make the flat top by working 4 rows in the checkerboard pattern where you make no increases or decreases at all. It's gonna look like this. When you have done this, it's time to start shaping the thumb. This part of the thumb is worked exactly like you work the left thumb. So you're gonna start on an even row with 10 slip stitches in color A. Then you are gonna work the checkerboard pattern for 3 checkerboard repeats or 12 rows, and then you are gonna start chaining. So you're gonna start by chaining 13, then turning and working the exact same way as you did for the left thumb. The instructions for which you can find in part 1. When you have repeated the instructions for the thumb, fasten off and also repeat the instructions for the accent rows from the left thumb. When you have done so, we are going to move on to working on the opposite side of the thumb and the decrease section of the palm part. Simply fasten off and we are going to start working the opposite side of the thumb and the palm part of the right mitten. Now the thumb part for this section is worked exactly like you did for the left thumb. So you're going to work increases over 4 rows, then decreases over 4 rows. The thing that's different from the left thumb is how you work the palm part. For the left mitten, you work the thumb with the increases on the palm part because that's where the thumb was placed. Now for this right mitten, the thumb is placed on the decrease section of the palm, which means that you are going to decrease for all of the 8 rows where you work your thumb. We're going to do a really quick reminder on how to do this, but start by inserting your hook 12 stitches up the thumb in the back loop. Chain 2, this will count as your first stitch, then work in the checkerboard pattern until you have 3 stitches left on the row. You are going to yarn over slip stitch 2 together and then skip this final stitch. You chain 1 and you turn and work your way back up the thumb, where you will work the additional 2 stitches into the 3rd loop of the accent row. Then you will make a turning slip stitch instead of a turning chain, turn your work and work until you have 3 stitches left on the row. Decrease again by 2 stitches by yarn over slip stitching 2 together and skipping the final stitch. Now you will work decreases on both the thumb part and the palm part in the following way. On the thumb part, work until you have 3 stitches left on row, decrease by 2 by yarn over slip stitching 2 together and skipping the final stitch. Also for the palm part, work until you have 3 stitches left on row, decrease by 2, but you are going to repeat these decreased rows until you have decreased the thumb by 4 stitches and a total of 8 stitches on the palm part to make it match the front part. For a more thorough explanation on how to work the increases and the decreases on the thumb part, go back to the beginning of this video. And for more detailed instructions on how to decrease on the palm part, also go back to the beginning of this video. You are now going to work the final 2 accent rows, and these are worked in the same way that you did the previous accent rows. The only difference being is that now you're also going to connect the bottom part of the palm part with the top part of the palm part. As usual, you work only in color A for the accent rows and you start off with 10 slip stitches. Then you make 12 yarn over slip stitches, and for the 13th slip stitch, join with the other side of the base of the thumb. Then work all your way up to the decrease part, where you will work 9 yarn over slip stitches evenly up until the middle of the flat part. And simply chain, turn, work your way back, fasten off, weave in any loose ends or just double knot and snip it. Repeat the sewing steps from the left mitten, and there you have it. Now you've made a full pair. As intimidating as felting can be, this is actually the easiest part. Start by tossing them in the washing machine. Put it on a low temp wool cycle or delicate cycle. If you're lucky, this will be enough and they will felt down to the right size. However, more likely is that you are gonna wanna re-soak them. And I'm not talking a little bit moist, you're gonna fully drench them. And then you're gonna toss them in the dryer, preferably with something else in the dryer to provide some friction. Set a timer for 10 minutes. Check the mittens. If you want to felt them more, set another timer. Continue to do this until the mittens reach your desired level of felting. This is the part where you can manipulate the size and the gauge of the mittens. So if your gauge was a little small, simply felt them for a shorter period of time. If it was a little big, felt them for longer. If you have smaller hands, felt them for longer. If you, like me, have large hands, felt them a little less. As long as the mitten is a little bit damp, you can reshape it. I decided to reshape mine a little bit lengthwise to make room for my acrylics. And the reshaping is simply done by stretching. And there you have it. A pair of compact, chunky, comfortable mittens. I hope this process was easy and fun to follow, and please let me know if you have any questions. Until next time, bye my friends.